Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a very, very warm welcome at today's event of 50 Best Aftershock. My name is Regula Izewin, and I'm your host today. We are live right now, streaming across the world's latest edition of the Thought Leadership Series created by the World's 50 Best Restaurant Organization in 2014. There have already been 15 editions of 50 Best Talks, providing a platform for thought-provoking debates and inspirational addresses by the chefs and restaurateurs who are challenging and changing the food and restaurant world. On behalf of 50 Best, I'd like to offer you a very warm welcome to this first event in the World's 50 Best Restaurants 2021 program. It's the first real live event for the world's 50 best brand in more than 2 years. Give us an explosive applause for that. We are here together. We are delighted and grateful to be reunited in person again. How special is this? I'd also like to thank our partners, especially San Pellegrino and Aquapana, the main sponsor of this list, and Flanders and the city of Antwerp, the host destination for this year's event program. Our thanks also to Estrella Damm, Barexton Aquavit, Gin Mare, Flor de Caña, Ili Café, Beronia, Night Timber, Cinco Yotas, Jaén Celestion, and Nude Glass, whose delicious products you may have already savored. And if you haven't, you will have the chance after our debate. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here in my hometown of Antwerp in Flanders, Belgium. Woo! Yay! Okay, so Antwerp is a town that stood on the forefront of new beginnings in the 16th century. Cloths, spices, sugar, and luxury goods from all over the world arrived here and were traded here. Antwerp was the most important place in Europe, a hub for new and open-minded thinking, often anarchic book printing, and also the home to an art movement. Antwerp was Babylon. People of all backgrounds, speaking hundreds of different languages, worked here in a harmony unseen anywhere else in this world. The Reformation never succeeded here because in Antwerp, trade relations came before any faith. As we stand here today at new beginnings, Antwerp is the perfect place to start. So today we gather here with chefs from all over the planet, speaking in one common language. The language of food. Very shortly, our special lineup of chefs will be joining me on stage. We'll be discussing a range of issues from sustainability to staff well-being and authenticity in food, all under the title Aftershock, because let's face it, we're a little bit shocked about what happened. Over the last 18 months, many questions came to the fore on a global level in the hospitality industry, and the aftershocks of the changes will be felt for a really long time. Today, we will unpack some of the tidal shifts that have been taking place, and we will question how restaurants can be a force for good. Over the last year and a half, enforced closures gave restaurants a chance to rethink and to optimize their operations, often looking at how they could be more sustainably or have less impact on the planet. At the same time, an extensive labor shortage is leading venues around the world to reassess the value of their workforces, putting greater power in the hands of hospitality workers. Also, many institutions in the restaurant and food world set out on a path of dismantling systemic racism after the watershed events of 2020. Many in the industry are seeking a new dawn, and many are already putting in the work. So there's a lot to discuss. Today, we will focus on 3 topics: authenticity, sustainability, and accountability. The way the afternoon will work is that I will shortly invite our chefs to join me here on stage, and 3 more global experts on the topics I've just mentioned have prepared important video addresses for us today. So we will first watch a short film on the topic of authenticity in food, and then we'll have a discussion. There will be more video interludes when the other topics are introduced. So, it is, ladies and gentlemen, my absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce you to our guests today. First, we have Daniel Humm, the Swiss-born chef owner of 11 Madison Park in New York. Daniel? Yay!
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Secondly, we have Selassie Atadika of nomadic restaurant Miduno in Accra, Ghana. Welcome, Selassie. And then, last but not least, Junghyun Park, JP, of Korean-born chef of restaurant Atomics in New York. Welcome, JP. JP, Selassie, Daniel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Let's start with a special message from Indian chef Pratik Sidhu of Mask in Mumbai.
Everyone, my name is Pratik Sadhu and I'm chef of Mask in Mumbai, India. Many have said that India is akin to a continent, and here we have grown up celebrating its plurality. I don't know how many of you have been to India, but if you travel the country, it is believed that every few hundred kilometers, honestly, you encounter a different language, a dialect, a different cuisine, different ingredients, and honestly, a different way of life. And as a chef, I'm constantly learning. But this plurality begs the question, what is authentic Indian food? And of course, it's a chef's dream to capture the essence of India on a plate. When we opened Mask back in 2016, which has now been voted in Asia's 50 best restaurant list, that is exactly what we set out to do. We traveled the lengths and breadths of the country in search of lesser known ingredients, inspiration in traditional processes. At Mask, the Indian food that we cook isn't about looking into regional recipes and simply plating them with new tweaks. It demands revisiting traditions with purpose, and I think that's so important, and discovering ways in which food can build cross-cultural bridges. We thought about how a Japanese takoyaki could meet a Goan chorizo pao through a Tamil paniyaram. You know, it sounded mad, but that's what made it exciting. But the bigger question is, when does culinary appreciation turn into cultural appropriation? If you ask me, it's when there is not enough or accurate credit given to the source. Our task as chefs is to make people curious about unfamiliar cultures and taste, to connect the dots in ways that can resonate with them. To us, it begins with the right vocabulary, to define the dishes and attributing the source with authenticity, and ensuring that the food or the community behind it isn't exoticized or othered in the process. Their story should be effortlessly woven into the larger whole. We also think about sourcing with due diligence. The beauty of our ever-changing menus is that we can choose the source smaller, often inconsistent quantities from the sources that benefit the community or the farmer collectives or the tribal co-ops or the homegrown brands or the responsible fish farms. For instance, in January, we made something called Til Good ice cream. And we used Nolan Good, which means new jaggery in Bengal. And it is extracted from wild date palm trees during winter months. The sugary sap, extracted using incisions made just below the leaves, is boiled and turned into this rich, earthy good or sweet caramel. A small homegrown brand helped us procure this all the way from Santhal Forest village near Bankura in West Bengal, which is on the east side of India. I do think how you source and who benefits from the end result should also be discussed when we speak about appropriation. if you get mass-produce turmeric off the supermarket shelves in America for your turmeric latte, it is still Indian haldi doodh. Sure, but you can't claim to celebrate India in the same breath. It's simply not as traceable. But when you take on foods from different cultures, we also need to be humble. Someone somewhere out there knows more than you. So you have to get comfortable with getting corrected or being told that your inspiration translated into poor execution. It just comes with the turf. A small example, Ladakh, I would say, has been a big inspiration for me. It is one of the northernmost part of India. And not much is known about the cuisine of Ladakh outside of the region itself. It is often stereotyped with its momos, which is dumplings, and thukpa, which is a noodle soup. But over the years since 2016, I've made several trips to that region, and which helped me broaden my understanding of their approach to flavors. Though honestly, I can't claim to know everything about that region. It was a joy, but it was a joy to bring some of those flavors into the restaurant. And the first dish that we brought wasn't momo. It was sea buckthorn granita. Sea buckthorn is a berry which is grown extensively in that region, widely. Yet, I would say it's frightfully easy to reinforce stereotypes through our choices. And I would love to hear from the panel on how they draw the fine line between referencing and reinforcing stereotypes, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. Also, if you continue to practice and operate only within what you know, can you possibly further the dialogue around food?
Well, Chef Pratik posed some very interesting questions to our chefs, and I'm going to repeat the last one. How do you draw the line between referencing and reinforcing stereotypes, especially when it comes to marginalized communities? Selassie, I'm going to ask you, at Midunu, your goal is to celebrate Africa's cultural and culinary heritage, focusing especially on West Africa. How are you honoring your roots through that? And are you creating a new cuisine?
I wouldn't call it a new cuisine. I believe it's honoring and understanding the elements that came before me. In Ghana, there's a Dinkra symbol, which is actually called Sankofa. And it's a picture of this bird, or an image of a bird, and it's facing forward, the feet are facing front, and the neck is facing backwards. And it means go back and get it. Taking from the past to move you forward into the future. And a lot of what I do is saying, we know climate change is coming, we need to create sustainable food systems, but we also need to connect with our culture, our community, and the cuisine that came before us and understand why those choices were made. Why do we have these preservation techniques? Why do we use these ingredients during this time of year? And taking those elements into what I do. So I've had the luxury and the privilege to have traveled to over 40 countries in the 54 countries in the continent. And I try to bring those elements to my table in principles, plant-forward, bold flavors, shared communal cuisine, ancient grains, foraged wild foods, to have that conversation, to allow us to bring more voices to the table that aren't being heard.
True, yeah. Any of you guys want to comment on that? Or shall I just ask you my question, GP? You have been celebrated for your work at Atomics for combining traditional Korean and Western techniques in a fine dining context. How do you balance these contrasting ideas?
We are working very close with a lot of the, we can call the keeper or some artisan who preserving the Korean food culture in Korea. So we are very connecting each other very closely, which is kind of foundation of the Korean food, which we cannot lose at all. But I'm as a chef who's running the restaurant in the New York, we are more kind of innovating and moving forward kind of things. We have some each kind of mutual respect each other. So we to keep our authenticity as a more authentic for the future. We might be someone need to be preserving our history, and someone need to be find out what's going to be future for our Korean cuisine. So we are kind of connecting each other, have a more kind of mutual respect, which is very important. So I think this is how we try to find out the imbalance in between, can be more Korean or can be more New York food. So
Yeah, of course, because nobody says that cuisine cannot evolve.
yeah, sure, yeah.
It's always an evolution. So Daniel, you recently created a whole new menu, reopening your restaurant influenced by a myriad of food cultures. What was the process and how do you reference those cultures?
I don't know how to answer this question exactly, but I can tell you how we arrived, to get to this point, to get to this place. To
I
cook.
saw, for example, on your Instagram, you posted a photo of one of your dishes and you really explained where it came from, which I think is really interesting to give that platform to really explain what your thought process was and honoring the traditions that you took from.
Yeah, I think it's always important to know where things are coming from and to give credit to
Definitely.
where it's due, right?
Giving credits is really important. I think you can also agree with that, Selassie, when it comes to giving credit if someone uses.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that I find, we were just looking at India, and one of the things that's really important is how do you bring those voices to the table? How do you source correctly? But I think even beyond sourcing correctly, for example, at the moment, everything is kind of like African cuisine is sort of the interesting cuisine people are looking at, the diversity of which is not just to sort of to hear about it, but it's how do we create and encourage and create an enabling environment for marginalized people or cuisines to actually survive. So how do we make sure that that community that's creating this one ingredient that they've been, for example, the locust bean that's being fermented in West Africa, how do we make sure that it's not just about us now in a lab somewhere fermenting that locust bean, but how do we create and support an environment where the women doing those ingredients are also supported and that tradition can stay alive? How do we make sure that the culinary custodians that have allowed these ingredients, these techniques to last over time are supported? How do we make sure the chefs that are in these countries that are bringing this forward are supported? So in the context of Ghana, the enabling environment is challenging. Water and electricity, you've got to have a backup generator. You've got to have I have a borehole. I have a water treatment plant. You've got staff that haven't been trained professionally, and you're doing that training. So in my kitchen, I serve as sommelier, as a teacher, as a storyteller, as someone who is working with farmers to bring in these ingredients that, because of the structural injustices, have actually been told, like, this ingredient is not important. We actually need pineapples and mangoes to be sent out of the country. But you're now telling them that domo mushroom, that sea bray mushroom, needs to come to my table, and I want to pay you for it, and it's important for us to keep that tradition alive.
Yeah, of course, because it's not all about restaurants, it's also about the people who produce the food, and you can honor a cuisine and a culture, but you have to pull on the same rope together, the producers and the restaurants. So what is an authentic dish to you, GP?
Authentic is, I think, the barrier, the meaning of the authentic can be very depend on the person how they adapt it. So authentic food can be once from my mom's made it, or authentic food can be from like 1,000 years old kind of recipe. So for example, the Korean dish we call maybe 부대찌개 or tteokbokki, which is very generally globally well-known dish as a Korean food. But hard to say that is that authentic because they have some spams in there. It's different kind of ingredient. It's actually pretty new in the Korean cuisine as well. So, but it's authentic meaning is getting changing it. So we are always need to be found out the imbalance between of course it can be very arguing situation, but at the same time we need to be more kind of open conversation with what can be the meaning of the authentic as our cuisine, and then what's going to be kind of ingredient or food we can just bring our culture to the next step. So we are kind of in the middle, I guess. And also, I love the, definitely it's my authentic food is definitely comes from my mother or some grandmothers made for me.
So authenticity and nostalgia is very, very closely linked together. So how about you, Daniel? What's an authentic dish to you? And does authenticity mean anything to you?
Yeah, I think what he said, I think authentic is when it's personal. It could be authentic because of history as well. But in our case, I think it's something that is truly personal, and you really believe in your heart, and there is a reason why you're doing it. I think the great restaurants in the world, for me, and I'm sure for most people here, are the restaurants where you really feel like each plate just makes sense that it comes out of that kitchen. It feels of the place, of that chef. It sort of has a signature to it, and it takes a long time as a chef to find that, to truly find that voice. In my case, I'm still searching, but we came up with 4 years ago. It was actually for the first time I created a dish where I felt for the first time like, wow, this is the dish. This is how I want to cook. And but then I was kind of stressed out because I was like, well, after 25 years, I have one dish. And sort of that led us to kind of trying to understand what was happening with this dish. And we came up with 4 fundamentals that we feel like were true to this dish. And it's sort of like trying to create a recipe for future recipes. And what it was about that dish, it was a celery root cooked in a pig splatter. And what it was about this dish, it was number one, it was delicious. And delicious is something that you don't need to think about. It's an instant deliciousness. We all know, like after one bite, you're either smiling, and if your mind starts going before your smile, it's probably not the most delicious. Number 2 is the dish has to be beautiful, and beauty is different to different people, but in our case, it's a minimal beauty, an effortless beauty. Number 3, it has to be creative. It has to move food forward in a certain way. And then the last one, it's intention. Like there has to be a reason why it exists. It could be as simple as 2 ingredients grown next to each other on a farm, but it could be a historic reference. It could be a childhood memory. It could be inspired by an artist's work. So when you have those 4 things working together, they're actually not necessarily friends. Like creativity and deliciousness, they are, they fight with each other often. But since then, we've sort of using these 4 fundamentals, and they have to be always present within each dish. And it has really, I believe, made the meal at 11 Madison Park more authentic.
Yeah. So I think that authenticity and nostalgia, but also respect, are closely knit together. So I think especially if you're working with a cuisine from a culture that isn't your own, you should be very careful in how you reference things and how you pay homage to those cultures. Do you have any advice for us, maybe Selassie, on how chefs can do this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's probably 3 easy steps that I think about for people who are, let's say, if we're speaking about African cuisine. The first is really to educate yourself, understand, the ingredients, understand the people, understand the culture. The second is bringing voices to the table. How do we extend the table to include whether it's other chefs, other suppliers, producers, that even in my kitchen, I will bring in someone who has more expertise than I do on that ingredient. And then the last one is how do we support the businesses from those communities in how we procure? Yeah. So how do we purchase ingredients or make sure that there's a flow of money that allows to have sustainability in those communities that we are sort of being inspired by, and make sure that they are benefiting, making sure that that community can continue with what they're doing. So those are, for me, sort of the 3 things. But I mean, absolutely, food continues to be dynamic. Mm-hmm. There are recipes. There was something I was working on at one point, and I called my mother, and I was like, how do you normally do it? And she's like, explains the process and says, make sure it's not gonna be thick. And that was exactly what I was planning on doing. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, so I think at the end of the day, you know, as chefs, as creatives, we're always gonna be adding to the conversation. And it should be that way. We should be adding something different than someone else did. Otherwise, I think we're not fully expressing ourselves as well. Exactly. The sort of my matrix is sort of looking at how community, culture, and cuisine are intersecting with environment, sustainability, and economy. Yeah. So a biggest, for me, as living in a country where there's a massive importation of food and ingredients, is how do I shift and change that conversation to making sure that local producers and are actually part of the conversation of maintaining this sort of foodways.
Exactly, and that is something that brings us to our next topic, which is sustainability. And to set the scene, let's play another film. It's a trailer for a documentary called Sacred Cow, which was created by Diana Rogers, a nutritionist, author, and sustainability advocate. Let's have a look.
There's a debate out there about whether or not we should be eating meat.
Red meat is now worse for us in our minds than fat ever could have been, because there are so many more reasons to avoid red meat, not only for your health, but also now for the goodness of others, including not killing animals, and for the good of the planet.
You can't blame people for being confused.
They're trying to make really important moral and ethical decisions about what they should eat and how they should live. It's easy to fall for extreme, simple answers.
The majority of meat produced in this country is under such abhorrent conditions. We both are making reactions to the same evil, if you will. They're just different choices of how to do it.
But what if we're arguing about the wrong thing?
You look at the Midwest now in the United States, it's corn and soy, and corn and soy, and more corn. This massive amount of monoculture is having devastating effects on the environment. What used to be great biodiversity is gone.
The agricultural revolution has been transitioned into the processed food revolution.
If you want to fatten up your animals, you put them in a pen where they can't run around and get physical activity, and you feed them lots of grain. Humans are like that too.
What if the very animals we're fighting about are a key piece of fixing what's broken?
The animals are going to die, and your only choice now is to do it well. That is the only choice left. Are we going to be the death that's killing everything, or are we going to be the death that's part of the cycle of life that actually makes life stronger? Those are really our only options.
Fascinating and chilling video. It sparks some interesting questions. Can meat be part of a sustainable food system? Should we even eat meat at all? Some experts say that eliminating meat from our diet could reduce emissions, water use, and also free up land for crop production, while other studies favor the view that cattle rearing done right could actually support biodiversity and ultimately help the planet. Regenerative agriculture, which aims to reverse climate change by rebuilding organic matter in the soil, is sometimes hailed as a potential solution. Daniel, these issues might have been at the top of your head when you were reopening EMP with a plant-based menu. Could you walk us through your thought process? Why did you do that?
Well, I realized during the pandemic, we turned our kitchen into a commissary kitchen to produce meals for people in need. And we cooked over 1 million meals for food insecure New Yorkers. And during that time, I had many thoughts. I had thoughts about what luxury means, you know. Does it make sense to have a restaurant that charges $350 in a city where 10 minutes away people don't have food? And in a way, I also felt that everything I wanted to do, which is, become the best restaurant in the world and get to 3 Michelin stars and do all that. And I felt like I've done that. So maybe there is a new chapter in my life. So I had a lot of thoughts. But I was also aware of the incredible platform 11 Madison Park has given me. And without that platform, we could have not cooked 1 million meals. So it was important. We had supporters. But it was clear that I didn't want to open the same restaurant as it was before. And I realized that food is my language, and food is a part of so many issues we're facing in the world, not just food insecurity, but the way we farm. COVID also has shown how unhealthy a lot of people are due to food. And so I felt, in a way, I'm in a privileged position to actually make a change. And then the fact that per day, our signature dish was a roasted duck. We used 60 ducks per day, and which is a pretty small restaurant. And we have any resources. We could pay the highest price for that duck because how much we charge. And we have a huge research team who could find that perfect duck from a place we love. And we searched all over America, and I feel guilty because we actually continue to serve duck, even we had the knowledge. But what we do is not just an artistic endeavor, it's also our business and our livelihood, so you gotta be careful. But during COVID, we faced bankruptcy. We got to a place where we had to get comfortable with losing everything. Wow. And as you're going through that, it's really uncomfortable, but later on, it's extremely liberating if you find comfort in losing everything. And so from that place, knowing that duck, that farm, does not exist in America, we can't continue to pretend like it does. Another example, caviar is such an obvious example, but we're celebrating caviar as a luxury ingredient. There is nothing luxurious about caviar anymore. Absolutely not. It's the opposite. It's farm-raised, it's flown in from far, it's not rare at all, and it doesn't taste good. It doesn't taste what it once tasted.
Yeah. It's the idea that people have that
it's an old idea, yeah, and we're holding on to. So if I'm celebrated as a chef that pushes food forward, I just felt the responsibility to say, hey, and we hear about these, arguments that there are these farms, but if you want to serve beef, there are these farms. They have 10 cows, and they do everything beautifully, and they slaughter once a year. And then, yeah, you can get that duck. But you know how many tenderloin you have out of 10 ducks? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like a day's worth of supply. And then they put it in the freezer, and, it's nice. It does exist. Yeah. But, and I can't speak of everywhere in the world I'm just not aware of. I just can speak from my own experience.
And I think it's great that you feel that as a top restaurant, you have this responsibility because you realize the platform that you have to be at the forefront of this change and to show that actually you can have a plant-based menu. You do not have to be afraid that your customers will demand the duck. you can give them something else delicious, and you can show other places, other restaurants, it's possible.
I think one thing I want to add is that we are not anti-meat.
No.
But we are pro-planet, and we are actually going there more and more. And if we're going there, I feel we have the resources of a creative team, and so I feel that creativity should go towards a plant-based diet. If we're going there, let's make it delicious and beautiful and magical. And so that's sort of...
Yeah, and if you live locally to a fantastic beef farm, then you can incorporate that beef into your menu because it's local, it's sustainable, but you have to look at the source, and the source is very important. So tell me, JP, how do you approach serving meat and fish at your restaurant?
As we are a very small restaurant, we only have 12 seats in our dining room, so definitely where we're sourcing all the protein is we can working very small scale compared to massive scale. So we are working with different vendor, and which is I totally believe who care about the product well, and then sourcing from directly from the farm with really well raised. And so we are sourcing different fish and the meat from all around the world, and also by the season. So I believe even the meat and fish has their own season to making better taste, So for the summer, we're serving the 병어, which is butterfish, which is very beautiful in the summertime. So of course you can find out every single time for 4 seasons, but also fish has their own season, which is I believe that nature has their own cycle. So what's the real meaning of the not having the meat and fish is not just only giving for the good for the earth, if you have it, having really nice protein on their own season, it also can be the making the earth to survive in the better way. So we need to find out the imbalance in between, not just focus about going to the extremely about talking about one topic. We need to talking about how we can making our ecosystem naturally growing up, ecosystem naturally being a better, not about meat producing about it, just about can be agriculture, can be about fishing process, everything. So we can do more open conversation about it.
Yeah, definitely. Selassie, what do you think? Is there more that restaurants can do with regards to sustainability? You're in a special position because you just said you have your own water supply system.
Yeah. No, I believe that the role of the restaurant, in my case, is to help to shape how people think and about food on their plates. So from the beginning, we've been plant forward. So we do use animal proteins, but a majority of our menu is actually using nuts, seeds, beans, lentils to bring in the majority of our proteins. We're using a lot of preserved elements. So for example, in one of our traditional dishes in Ghana, which is called red, it's beans that's been stewed. There's tomato, there's palm oil, but there's bits of smoked fish that flavors the dish. So it's also thinking about how do we reduce the amount. I've also, in my case in Ghana, talking about planetary health is not necessarily the most interesting entry point for a lot of consumers. Personal health or tradition is something that is a better way. And of course, deliciousness is always the best way. So it's like someone's eating something delicious, they actually won't even notice that maybe 80% of that meal was plant-based, or plant-forward. So I think that I've always kind of looked to see what makes sense given our terroir. So from the beginning, in terms of sustainability in Ghana, we know there's climate change. We know that we need to look at crops that do better in drought-tolerant areas. So for example, the northern part of the country, we have millet, we have sorghum, we have fonio. These are all grains that are that do well. They don't need a lot of nitrogen inputs. They do well in poor quality soil. They do well with less water. So I've actually been playing with traditional dishes and replacing them with some of these grains just to take the conversation in another direction. using, for example, tropical staple trees. When I'm talking about plantain, coconuts, jackfruit, these in place of corn, in place of other crops that we know may not be the easiest for our soil. So I see more and more people asking me, where are you sourcing this from? I want to eat it at home. So we've been able to influence how people are eating at home based on how they see these ingredients that they've forgotten about, or we've in many ways kind of put to the corner because it was peasant food earlier, and bringing them back to the table.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because you can influence so many people with your food, and it's just basically you have to be creative, and you guys are super creative in finding solutions to this. So yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thanks for...
I want to say...
Yeah, please do.
2 more things. Number one, it's very clear that this isn't an option for many restaurants to go plant-based, because there's a lot of work that has to be done. Like and we use the word plant-based and not vegan, but for most people, when they hear the word vegan, that's not the restaurant people are excited to go to eat. Yeah. So I think the whole perception needs to change, and guest perception, so restaurants can actually charge enough. Yes. Also for plant-based dishes. And then the other thing is the word sustainability, it's too late. We don't need sustainability. We need like a radical change. Like things has to really change. Like we could have talked 15 years ago. I wish we would have talked a lot more about sustainability, but it hasn't really happened. So I think it requires radical change. And I hope we had this unique platform to make this move as a 3 Michelin star restaurant to go fully plant-based, and I hope it will empower others to say, hey, they can do it, we can do it too.
I think that empowerment is really important, because if people see that the world's top restaurants are making these changes, then other restaurants, they might feel more empowered to do so and do not feel like they have to stick to this traditional system. And also it's the corner thinking, vegan, vegetarian. No, let's just just think about food in a very conscious way. Sustainability, indeed, it's late. Radical change is what we need now. And also in our own consumerism, we need to demand change and don't buy the things anymore that you don't want to see in the stores.
Today, 80% of the chicken that you find in a supermarket has been chicken flavored.
Yeah. And on that note, on that fantastic, delicious note, we have one more topic to discuss, guys, in today's debate, and it's in the title of accountability. We already talked about that a little bit just now, but I want to introduce the topic with a video from Chris Hall in the UK.
Hi, I'm Chris Hall, founder of the Burnt Chef Project. Over the last 18 months, we have had an epidemic of massive proportions. We've experienced things like sensory deprivation, breathlessness, loss of energy, the ability to go out and do things that we want, and sadly, a great loss of life. But I'm not talking about COVID-19. I'm talking about a subject that has been affecting our industry for a lot longer. Employee well-being due to high levels of stress and poor mental health. Often we find that the stigma of mental health is so strong that it can take up to 10 years for someone to say out loud that they aren't well. Now, when you consider that our studies have shown that 4 out of 5 hospitality professionals have experienced at least one mental health issue during their career, those numbers are pretty scary. In an industry which celebrates a turbulent life of excess and a badge of honor in not letting the side down, is it any wonder that it's been a struggle to open conversations and fight the stigma of mental health within hospitality? Most recently, we have seen mass shortages worldwide in the hospitality community as visitor numbers continue to peak, yet staffing numbers drop. Our studies have shown that work-life balance and feeling valued rate higher than all other reasons why people do not want to return to the third largest sector in the world. That's why I started the Burnt Chef project back in May 2019. The aim was simply to raise some awareness for general mental health issues. Mental health is something we all have, and I wanted to raise awareness through a series of black and white photography. The hospitality professionals I approached were only too eager to jump in front of the camera to have their best side captured, only to back away quickly when the subject of mental health was mentioned. An interesting response to something that was so deeply affecting our industry. But, like picking at a loose thread, I continued my work. Time went on and the number of portraits grew. Every image with its own unique story conveying a powerful message saying, "You're not alone, more goes on behind the scenes, and today we make a stand." Fast forward 2 years, and since then, the Burnt Chef project has grown significantly to provide a wealth of industry-leading resources, such as free training through the Burnt Chef Academy. We cover things like nutrition, stress reduction, mental health awareness, plus much more. We also now provide 24-hour support services, design tools dedicated to challenging the stigma of mental health, and provide leaders with the skill set that they need to effectively tackle this subject matter head on. Our latest figures show that our tools have reached 112 countries worldwide, but our work here is still far from done. By turning to other professions, we can be inspired to change the way in which our great industry runs. When you look at firefighters, for example, we know they're provided with the right tools and equipment needed to effectively douse flames and save lives, navigating their biggest area of risk safely. With 1 in 5 of the people we spoke to recently looking to leave in the next 12 months, and even more sitting on the fence, it's time that we provided our own teams with the tools they need so that they too can fight the flames associated with high levels of stress, burnout, and mental illness, to ensure that this is the profession of choice. Now, we know it's been a tough year, and whilst COVID has amplified the resource crisis we're currently facing, we cannot blame COVID for the situation we find ourselves in. The well-being of our teams has been neglected for far too long, and the profound impact to our industry has been bubbling under the surface for a much, much longer period of time. Margins are tighter than they've ever been, especially since COVID. We have less hands on deck now than ever before, and we're pushing our resources to the max. We expect more and more from our teams in order to ensure our customers are happy and our businesses thrive. I believe that in order for us to turn this ship around, we need to provide our leaders with the skills to manage with confidence, empathy, and to ensure that the well-being of both themselves and their teams is made a priority. To become agents of change and work together, we need to breed a new form of hospitality professional and in turn, a healthier industry. This is why we at the Burnt Chef Project believe in and dedicate our time not just to helping those who have mental health issues and need someone to talk to, but we also focus on building the capability of our greatest asset in the trade, the people who make up the beating heart of our industry. There's no getting away from the fact that implementing change is like moving a cruise liner and not a dinghy. But we are drawing a line in the sand and saying it's time that we challenge the status quo of that's the way things have always been done, so that we can begin to operate in sustainable ways, improve our retention, recruitment, and ultimately provide individuals with a profession in which they can thrive rather than simply survive. We want to encourage future generations of hospitality professionals to join us in what I believe is the best profession in the world. So I'd like to ask the 50 Best Talks panel today, as some of the leading lights in our industry, how do you go about addressing stress and ensuring the well-being of your team, your own staff, and what changes will you make to improve this profession and address the issues we face together? Thank you.
Wow, that's a topic that's been on a lot of people's minds lately, and rightly so. JP, why don't you give an answer to Chris's question? How do you go about ensuring well-being of your staff these days?
I believe including myself, a lot of the chef on the stage and for the ceremony for the World 50 as well, they might be faced with the same problem while they're a young cook. But as I'm myself, it's we are kind of moving forward and overcome that kind of stress and everything. But it doesn't necessary to having same hazing kind of culture to passing the same environment to the like next generation young chef, you know, like people does, oh, I just made this on like overcome on all the stress hour, so you should do that. It's not very like fair or some very not like kind of makes sense for us. So I think we are kind of need to be voicing a little bit more about it, but at the same time, the people need to be like, especially the young cook need to be know about it. The being a good chef is actually physically need to be working long hour. It's like kind of art is like in between the practice, also like creativity. So we cannot making like really good restaurant just without actual practicing about the knife skill or some butchering skill and how to like handling all the ingredient. You know, you can have some wise view about the service, everything. So it's definitely like kind of taking time, and it's like need to be very focused about what they are doing it. So this is like very important to that to know about it. But also same time, like I believe the most chef is not very good like talker, like to the like all the employee. They like just give some order and just following my direction. You know, they're not really like doing conversation with all their employee well, because they're
style chefs.
yeah very much like, oh, this is like my way, so you should follow it in this way. So that kind of environments make them more kind of confusing about it. Am I losing? Am I like in this like good industry to working together? So I think that we need to be like talking more with our like young cook and or like the next generation to more with open conversation, how they feel, what they want, how they want to like make this like restaurant to being in a better space to work with it. Because you know, like running the restaurant in New York is not easy because of the high land, like all the salary, like everything. So we cannot giving like changing in a one day, or everyone just like working full day and working like 40 hours per week. And we definitely cannot making any profit, you know. So like the restaurant is also, you know, industry need to be making the profit to survive and then to growing up with it. So we need to be having like more open conversation with them to what's the they want to be grow up as a, like the young line cook to be a future of the restaurant generation. So I think we need to be, yeah, that's more important, I guess.
So much change is happening even
Yeah,
in that perspective. Selassie, what's your opinion in terms of what changes could be made in the restaurant world? How do you go about it in your kitchen?
My kitchen is probably quite different from your kitchens. I grew up mostly in the US, moved back to Ghana, and the context, the cultural context in which I work in, I decided first of all to have an all-female team. So all of my cooks are women. I've had to do a lot of education. So one of my best, I also make chocolates, Ghana cocoa. So one of my best chocolatiers actually started off as a cleaner, and she expressed interest, so we actually moved through the space and the process. Because of the challenges that exist in society, there's not a lot of safety nets for people. We constantly are having a conversation. I've met the family members of most of my staff. I've gone to funerals. I've gone to universities to make sure that those who wanted to move on to go back to school, they felt supported, and I gave them advice on what courses they should be taking. We've had, you know, staff not being well, and I've had to actually physically go to see the doctor because there was not enough understanding. So I've built it as a team. As a family, actually. As a family.
Less of an army-like situation, more family situation.
Yeah.
I think that's important because you spend so much time together.
Sure.
All the time together.
Yeah.
And it's also looking at menus and understanding, you know, in my space, what techniques should we be using? What equipment should we be using? What level of, you know, how do we simplify things in a way that allows us to work and have less hours at the moments that we need to have less hours? So kind of playing with some of that as well. If I wanted to do extremely highly technical dishes, that would, you know, put a lot more pressure on the team. So making choices like that at certain moments and certain seasons also allows us to kind of figure out how do we make sure that we are not overworked.
Interesting questions. So Daniel, in your experience, what are helpful ways to cope with high levels of stress and burnout? Do you want to talk to us about that?
I think it's clear that it's creating a great culture that is a key element, the culture of learning, but it's also, a culture where people don't get worked into the ground like it once was. Consistent days off. We have a running club once a week for people to show up to go on a run. We have a yoga club where people can go do yoga. We have this service where people get once a month a free consultation with a therapist, and then they can have more if they need more. So there's all these things, but I think the elephant in the room, and it's to address this, but it's to address others. Restaurants are too cheap. Restaurants are not charging enough. And I think that's I see a lot of journalists here, and restaurants get always hammered on price. But you're not just paying the food that's on the plate, There are so many costs involved to run a restaurant. And if we want to have better conditions for our employees, we need to raise our prices, because that will allow us to have a better work-life balance for our team, for them to ensure that they have a vacation, for them to ensure that they get a leave when they have a baby, all these things, because that hasn't been part of our culture for years.
So many things are too cheap today. I remember when I was growing up, we only went out to dinner maybe once or twice a year. I think maybe go back to that point where you only go for dinner once or twice a year, but because it is more expensive, but then it will also support a whole system, not only we're talking about sustainability, producers, but also your staff, their well-being, and creating better working environments and better kitchens and a better situation for everyone else.
Yeah.
So do you feel that it is your job, owning a restaurant, to make sure staff is happy? Because, of course, I think happy staff will do a better job.
No, 100%, and it's much more enjoyable to work with a team that's going to want to be there and it's going to stay, and is not always on their last,
Yeah. Is there still a stigma, or do you believe that it is easier for staff to come and talk to you about it if they feel unwell, do you think?
I think it's definitely not easy, because when they start working, they have tons of the list of the prep they need to be done in certain amount of time. So they want to make the time to talk with me, but at the same time, they have a lot of the work to do. And also seems like I'm doing some sending email or some developing the menu. Looks like I'm also doing some of my own projects. So it's not easy to communicate each other well. But I think that I might be going to be talk with our employee as well. It might be set up more section to, because sometimes I just pop up the kitchen and then asking some line cook and sitting down to get, how are you? If I'm asking them, it's I'm okay, chef. They're not really hard to say their feeling to me, one step. So you need to be taking more time to being, more in the family kind of situation.
Yeah, exactly. Like Selassie said, I think your situation where you're running your restaurant more like a family than an army.
Yeah.
I think it's important because maybe your staff will be feeling much more at ease to talk to you about how they are feeling and having a tough time.
I mean, I also have challenges because in Ghana, there's a lot of hierarchy within the space. So I actually have created a system where I have lots of people that people feel free to talk to different people. So it's just being aware of, they may not come to me with a certain issue. They may go to somebody else. But for someone else to say, okay, this is an issue that I'm going to raise, it's not going to be openly said, but they'll say, hey, you may not realize this, but so-and-so is having these issues. So there was one team member who was 120% and all of a sudden went to 40%, and I was like, what's going on? She wouldn't tell me, but I found out there were family issues that had transpired. And so it's being able to have enough people that are in the space that people can speak to. So it may not be me, it might be another staff member, it might be someone I have in HR who does check-ins. I have an accountant who also just checks in with people and randomly will pass me messages. I have my mother that calls and checks on people, because, no, I mean, like, there really needs to be lots of people that are in this space that are able to give you feedback because, like I said, not everyone's going to want to speak to me, and I think that's okay. I just need to know who else people would feel comfortable to discuss it with, and at what point they feel that they should either share that information with me anonymously without saying this staff member, but this is an issue that we need to address. And I sometimes leave that space for them to deal with the issue because they may not want me engaged and involved, but I'm giving them the authority to say, at your level, please find the best solution for this issue for this staff member.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, you are the chef, like you said. It's hard for your work, your employees to tell you that they're not feeling well because they don't want to disappoint you. But it looks like you're looking at ways, and Daniel as well, to give your employees the chance, like a safe place where they can go with their issues so that you can take care of each other.
And it doesn't change overnight, so it's definitely something that you have to create a space that people start to trust you or trust that the system is going to support them.
Exactly. Well, all very interesting conversations, but I am afraid we have been running out of time. I think we all agree that the aftershocks of the last 18 months need not all be negative. The industry is evolving in novel ways, and there are signs of positive revival. Excuse me. As humans, we have the skill to adapt and to reinvent ourselves and our systems. The most important thing is that we are having these conversations. Change will happen. It has to happen, like you say. Thank you, Daniel, Selassie, and GP, for this fantastic conversation, and thank you to our guests and our audience at home for following. On behalf of 50 Best, we look forward to seeing you again at the next event in the next few days. Have a brilliant afternoon. Fijne namiddag nog. Au revoir en veel spaß. Have fun.